And we're live. First things first, Tim, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely, Pouya. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation because I know I've known you for quite a while and I know we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot to discuss business wise, there's a lot to discuss on a personal side. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects of what you do that I want to dig into. But before any of that, why don't you give us a brief introduction to yourself and what you do?
Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to keep it as short as possible. My name's Timothy Franklin. I own FWM Designers LLC, and we are the developers of the Good Circles program. Essentially, what we do is we help businesses to reduce their operating costs while also funding nonprofit organizations at the same time.
Okay, that's awesome. I like that it's very to the point and sharpened up in terms of what you do. I know you worked on that a lot because before you have to explain the
Yeah,
entire business model and exactly what you do and everything else. I was sitting here waiting for a long explanation, but I like that you've tightened it up. That's awesome.
yeah.
So, in terms of the work that you're doing, how long has it been now that you're working with your nonprofit and everything else that you're doing with FWM Designers?
Let's see. Well, I've been working with the nonprofit side since June of 2022, and then we just launched our own nonprofit foundation to work along with our programs.
Okay, and that's more recently.
Yes.
Okay, got it. And how did that come about in terms of launching your own nonprofit?
Really, it was kind of a strategic move. So it allows us to operate within our core operations, but also provide even more value to the community.
Got it. Okay. One thing that I really like about you and everything that you do is you're one of very few individuals who can have multiple projects and businesses simultaneously building and scaling and be able to work on them all and be able to focus on them all. Usually my advice, especially to younger people or, beginner business owners, is focus on one. Focus on one business, one line of work, one idea, one product or service, and build that out and scale that and look to get the results you're looking to get before you venture into multiple businesses. But very few individuals can pull it off where they're focused on a variety of different projects or businesses. So I feel like you're one of those rare breeds. What are your thoughts on that? What would you tell the average person, or what's your take on that?
Right. So I would have to agree with you. I would advise most people to focus on one operation at a time. My operation is a bit unique. It's not particularly niche down into a singular sector. So me having kind of that broad focus helps me within my main operation, if that makes sense.
Got it. So your main operation essentially has all these other projects under the main umbrella. So it can
Correct.
almost work in that way where you're working on multiple things and it serves the bigger purpose.
Yeah, it's all ultimately to achieve the same goal.
Got it. Okay. I think that's where the exception applies. Because even if you look at an Elon Musk or a lot of individuals that are clearly optimizing for one main goal and they have multiple businesses, but those businesses are all simultaneously working towards one main goal, one main purpose. So I think it's important, for an entrepreneur or business owner to have that clear purpose, that clear main vision, and then you can have multiple projects or businesses building in that direction, right? I think it comes down to the
Absolutely.
purpose at the end of the day.
Right.
Okay, so before you got into business, and I have a lot more business questions for you, and we'll talk about all of that. What were you doing before business, and how did this path for you even start? How did you even get into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of dipped my foot into entrepreneurship, even though I didn't officially register a business industry. I was doing independent contracting, doing gig work, things of that nature. I just didn't register the full business side of it and take that route. Really, I don't think I was mentally ready as far as the mindset that it comes being a business owner and hiring employees and doing all that. I did quite well for a number of years to the point where I was making and taking home up to $70,000 a month. But that was kind of the max, and that had me working, upwards of 96 hours straight. And then, kind of my entire life was ripped out from underneath me, written into, some legal issues at no fault of my own that essentially left me unemployable. So I did a deep dive into business, wealth, tax, strategy, mindset, all of that. And, we've discussed this a few times, kind of had this epiphany where I realized I've been doing everything wrong my entire life, that it wasn't so much how much effort you as a singular individual could put in, but rather true success was built. And, it comes down to, what I've said multiple times that relationships create value, value attracts money, and money creates new relationships.
Why don't you elaborate a little bit on what you just said on that quote around relationships and the value of relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd addressed it, especially on the sales side, because
Mhm,
I don't particularly have a sales mindset. I
mhm.
have more of a relationship mindset. So I don't go into a call looking to strictly sell any particular one thing. I look to build a relationship, to identify the value that that individual holds and the value that I can bring to them, not just by myself, but through my network that I'm constantly developing. And then beyond that, as you establish that relationship and the value starts to flow back and forth, however it may be, then the money comes in the back end, and then that can in turn be reinvested into building new relationships and further growing the value that you can bring to the table.
Got it. So you're really just prioritizing the relationship over the short-term transaction.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's something that I believe, regardless. In your line of work, is in the nonprofit space, in bigger deals and longer sales cycles, that needs to be the approach. Anyways, you need to build relationships, cultivate relationships, expand the network, get in front of multiple decision makers, multiple parties. So that's part of it. But regardless of what anybody's selling, what product or service, I'm with you on that belief system, on that mindset of building the relationship, prioritizing the relationship. I've said this since I was 19 years old in sales, that when you close a deal, that's not when the relationship ends. That's where it begins. Right. I remember I
Correct.
said that to a prospect when I was 19 or so in my first real career sales job. And it landed really nicely. And I made a mental note to myself that, wow, this is really where it's at. First of all, I'm going to say this to all my prospects moving forward after the deal is wrapped up, just so they know I'm here to service them afterwards. And second of all, that is really the mindset you need to have. And then from there, I always talk about, this, we've talked about this before, you always prioritize long-term relationships over short-term transactions. And in the long run, I think that takes you much farther. The only difference I think within our mindsets is I do still believe in having clear proposals, clear offers, clear price points and terms and whatnot that you do present on every sales call, so that your prospects know exactly what they're looking at and how they can move forward with you if it is a fit. But I think you take more of a conversational approach and again are looking more to network and then let the deals fall in on the back end. So that's a slightly different approach, but again, it makes a lot of sense for your business model. Now,
Yeah.
something you said earlier too that I want to circle back to is you said in the earlier stages of getting into business, you weren't quite mentally prepared to become a business
Right.
owner, to become an entrepreneur. I feel like a lot of people are in that position. So, can you expand on that for me a bit? And then we'll continue to talk more about that idea because I think it's interesting for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, with that, epiphany that I had while I was going through a bit of a rough patch, really. We're all raised from birth that the key to success is to work hard, do well in school, get good grades, go to a great college or a great career in the technical space, something that will provide, longevity. It'll constantly be in demand. But again, all of that is solely predicated upon, exchanging your time for money. And that's not sustainable. The majority of businesses right now couldn't even provide a living wage. So regardless of how dedicated you are, and I'm telling you, I've worked 96 hours straight with no sleep, multiple times in a row, uh, to do well in life, and then literally all that can be taken away from you in one fell swoop at no fault of your own. So for me, that was kind of the transition. Like, okay, I really have to look at what I'm doing analytically and understand what were the mistakes that I made that allowed me to be put into this position. And then, as I began to understand what business really is, because it's not a transactional situation when you look at the broader picture, it's more of developing relationships because you don't want a client one time, you want a client for the rest of their life, right?
Mhm.
So it's really about building those relationships. And once I understood that, and understood that by building relationships, not just with clients, but with potential employees, with potential contractors, potential business partners, you're able to just do tenfold, a hundredfold, a thousandfold more than you can ever achieve by yourself.
So it sounds to me like initially you're under the impression that it's just going to take hard work from your end to succeed at the highest levels. Is that fair to
Right.
assume?
Absolutely.
And that clearly proved itself, especially in your case with, unforeseen circumstances happening, proved itself not to be true. And then that just changed your entire perspective to thinking more in terms of scale.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I had a great conversation a couple of days ago with a gentleman that's kind of going through that transition and mindset himself. And, I explained it like this. Look at the differences between the rich and the poor. The poor tell their children, go to school, get good grades, get into a good college, choose a good career path, and follow that the rest of your life. The rich, what do? They put them into the best, most expensive private schools, and it has nothing to do with the school. And they drive them to get into the best colleges and universities. And again, it has nothing to do with school. It's
Mhm.
because those individuals that are in those spaces, their parents are teaching them the same skill sets that these individuals are teaching to their children, which isn't that work hard, grind, and pinch every penny for the rest of your life. No, they're putting them into the venues that they need to be in to establish those relationships with the others that understand the true meaning of success is through relationships and value, not a particular, qualification or certification or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I know a lot of wealthier individuals who send their kids to schools and colleges and universities and whatnot is not for the education at all. It's
Right.
pretty much solely for the relationships and the network that they're establishing, so that in that next stage they can get that gig as an executive at XYZ company, or they can get into these partnerships, or they can get an early information on a startup investment or whatever it might be. So I'm definitely with you there. And I really like the emphasis you put on relationship building. And I know you're a father as well. So I'm assuming you're teaching this exact same principle to your own kids and making sure that they prioritize building relationships, correct?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely a priority for both myself and my wife.
Yeah, I figured because of the emphasis that you're putting on this, I figured it's really a priority. And speaking of kids and school and education and all of this, I think it's really important to address that. Now, I don't want people to misconstrue our message though and think that hard work is not a factor, or working at your business or putting in the work or doing the hours and everything else is not a factor. I think you would agree that the work is the foundation, it's the pillar. Putting in the hours, putting
Absolutely.
in the work, that's still necessary. So let's talk about
Yeah.
that for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the relationship is the starting point, and that allows you to get to work. Once you've got that relationship in place and you kind of have the resources that you need, then you can really get to work, grind it out, and build it however it needs to be built. And it's going to vary from operation to operation, niche to niche, right? It's going to be long hours. After starting the business, I can honestly say I've spent 16 to 20 hours or more in a singular day grinding out, sales calls, grinding out networking calls, building out business plans and strategy, prospecting, researching different tools that are going to allow me to automate and to be more efficient. So by no means is the relationship aspect the overall, because you really have to put that work in as well. But uh, it's building upon what you've established with those relationships.
In my own experiences as well, back when I was just a sales guy or a sales manager or in the corporate world, whatever position I held, I used to think to myself, I'm working and building this path to becoming an entrepreneur and business owner for myself. That was always the intention and why I got into sales when I was really young in the first place. It was to get into business, and I figured sales is a good entryway into business. And thankfully, I made the right bet, right? Obviously, revenue generation, client acquisition, and client retention is sales, and that's the most important metric of any business. So that was my mindset. But I used to think, everybody should be an entrepreneur, everybody should take that leap. And after getting into business and getting into entrepreneurship and realizing not only the level of risk tolerance it requires, not only the level of capital and everything else that it requires, not only the skill and the mental faculties and all of that that it requires, the connections, the network that it requires, the right experience, the right training and coaching and mentoring, whether from parents or mentors that it requires, all of that aside, just the sheer hard work and the hours you have to put in. And like you said, 16 to 20-hour days on sales calls, on handling the back end of the business, figuring out payroll, figuring out all these other factors. It really is not for everybody. And I
Right.
really don't think that entrepreneurship, quote unquote, like it's glorified nowadays on social media, is going to bring happiness or fulfillment for most people. It's entrepreneurship. You get into it for a very particular reason, and also because you have very particular goals and visions and ambitions and whatnot. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, because you just mentioned the hard work and everything else, and that's what it immediately made me think of. My own perspective change of going from everybody should be entrepreneurs to it's actually not for most people.
Right. So I would absolutely agree with you. You know, people that are, I don't know if this is going to run counter to kind of the individual that I am. People that are easily distracted or focused on entertainment have no place in the entrepreneurial path. Really, to be successful and being your own business owner, you have to be utterly obsessed with it. From the time you wake up until the time you finally rack out at the end of the night. Uh, you're constantly working through the back of your head or through networking calls or researching or building. You're constantly working on this project. It's a sacrifice, honestly, but you have to make that sacrifice to get to that point that you can really automate your processes so you can step away from it and work on the bigger picture.
I feel like the simple message here is that it needs to be a priority. If your
Right.
business is not a priority, if that pursuit is not a priority, it's just not going to work well for you, because you're not going to put in the time, the hours, and make the progress necessary to get the results, to bring revenue in, to keep yourself afloat, to reinvest back into business, hire out, scale. All of that is not going to be possible if you can't get through those initial stages. And I think that's where most people struggle. I mean, from your perspective, what do you think are the main struggles or the biggest sticking points for new business owners, new entrepreneurs?
So it was actually kind of running a little bit in the back of my head, and I would say the biggest challenge to this system is the support. So if you really want to start your own business, and you're not coming with a silver spoon where you've got, you know, mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers that can bankroll your operation from the beginning, then you're looking at bootstrapping. And what that means is you sacrifice everything else in your life. That's your marriage, your relationship with your children, your time off. If you like to go to the bar and drink with your buddies, get some wings and bullshit and watch the game, count that out. At least for the first few years, because you really have to grind it and you have to be utterly obsessed with it. More so even than with your partner, right? And your partner has to understand and be able to support you in that obsession because they understand the bigger picture. If you don't have that, if you have somebody that's going to constantly try to pull you away from it, you need to find a different path.
You brought up two really good points that I want to address. One is a support system and having that partner who's on the same page as you. Actually, I had a guest on just recently. I know you were in the military. He was actually in the military as well for 26 years, served in special forces and whatnot. One of the things we talked about is his wife and the support system and the infrastructure, and having people you love that you don't want to disappoint, that also hold you accountable and support your goals and ambitions. So we talked about that, and that's always been a really important factor in my life as well. So I'm definitely with you there. The other factor that you brought up as well, I heard a saying once that every time you're saying yes to leisure or to events or parties and everything else, you're saying no to your goals.
Right.
It's vice versa. It's a game of trade offs. And again, I think especially for new business owners, new entrepreneurs, if they're not willing to jump in both feet and prioritize, they're just going to be saying yes to everything else and saying no to their goals. And I think you made a great point that at least initially in the first couple of years, you need to be having that level of obsession, that level of focus, work ethic. And I think this is where people get confused because they look at social media, right? They see these quote unquote entrepreneurs in their Lambos and driving around and at a different restaurant every night and whatever else it might be. And they're thinking to themselves, well, I want that life, so I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And they expect that on day one.
Yeah.
Whether a lot of those stories are real or not, let's just say they are. Some of them are real. That's not going to happen on day one. And I personally believe in, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I believe in the rule of 3 years. The first 3 years of your business is strictly working and reinvesting in the business and scaling the business to get it to a point where you're comfortable and the business is actually operational. And in most cases, what I've seen, and I learned this from a mentor of mine, and it's been true in my own experiences and the people that I work with today as well, the third year in the business is usually where things take off and things are a lot more set in place and you have a strong foundation to now build off of. So I think the first 3 years is really where you're buckled in, putting in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to agree with that. Everybody kind of undermines, some of the more established business practice and some of the established systems in government. But they know what they're doing. They've been around the block. They've done it themselves. If you look at just the way funding situations are for business, you shouldn't expect to get any type of funding for your operation for the first 2 to 3 years. You're not going to get any debt because you're not going to have the credibility to show that you can kind of weather the storm. So the
Mhm.
first 3 years really is just kind of buckling down and saying, look, this is what I'm doing. I have to legitimize it. And if I can't stick with it for 3 years while it's bad, I'm not going to stick with it when it's good and everybody's willing to help me.
Yeah, I agree. And that's usually my rule of thumb exercise for anybody who's asking me, what path should I pursue? What product or service? What business model? I always tell them, if I told you, you have to do this, you have to be committed to this business for the next 3 years, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Would you still do it? If it's a hell no, there's no way I would do it. I'm not interested anymore. I can't spend that much time on this. I'm not that interested in it. I'm not that passionate about this. Then it's a no, because there's somebody out there who's willing to put in that type of work, effort, resources, energy, and get those results. So you're just not going to compete with them. And chances
No.
are that's probably not the right path for you to pursue, because it's going to require some level of purpose or passion to pursue something for the long term and stick with it and see the results. And if
Yeah.
none of that is there, you're just doing it for money or because you think it's a cool business model, or everybody's talking about this specific business nowadays and you want to do it too. Chances are that's not going to work out well for you.
No, honestly, you have that type of personality and you have to be really critical when you assess yourself, right? Because everybody can build a good business idea. It's really not that complicated. But not everybody has the discipline to follow through with it. So if you're one of those creatives that you like building business models, do just that. Sell that to somebody else that's going to have the discipline to carry through with it.
So you know me, I think we've known each other for over a year now. So you know how much I like discipline, how much I value and prioritize discipline. So I want to hear your thoughts on discipline, especially because you also served in the military. You came from that background. You're obviously a very disciplined person now. You're handling multiple businesses and projects. What are your thoughts on the role that discipline plays? And then we'll talk about how to build that discipline.
Yeah. Discipline is absolutely critical. That's why, with our culture, the American society in general, has kind of taken more of this lackadaisical approach to discipline and accountability. Uh, so, global warming, for example, everybody knows that it's an issue, but everybody sees themselves as, no, I'm not providing a substantial impact, so I don't need to change my lifestyle. But somebody else needs to do something about it, just not me. Uh, that's not discipline. That's an entire lack of personal accountability. And if you have that nature, business isn't the right place for you. Um, just strictly speaking, you're not going to have the wherewithal to carry it out through all the challenges that you are going to face because they're inevitable.
Hmm. So what you're saying essentially is discipline is personal accountability.
Right, because if you can't do it for yourself, nobody likes to be nagged. You can hire a coach and you can, tell your wife and your mom and your dad, everybody, hey, this is what I want to do. I want you to keep me on it. But if it's not something you are passionate about enough to maintain that discipline on your own accord without any outside assistance, regardless of any negative outcomes that could happen, right? Because, you spend 3 years grinding into your business, not spending time with your kids, not spending time with your wife. If they don't truly understand that and support you, right, you're going to lose that relationship. Is that a sacrifice that you're willing to make to be able to build what you're doing and be able to provide for them in the future, regardless of what that impact that has on your relationship? For me, I am. So,
I love that you said that, because this is something that I strongly believe, and I don't think I've ever really talked about it. So this is a perfect opportunity and platform to really kind of talk about this more at length. I've always found accountability, and obviously external accountability, to be almost an empty gesture at best, because I don't see how it would work. What I believe in is self accountability. Like you said, I can give you $1 billion plan. If you don't do anything with it and you have no discipline and you have no skills and no knowledge and no execution, it's worth nothing. Right. So it comes down to that self accountability. And I just, I'm not a believer in make your goals known to everybody, make your goals public and put it on social media, put it everywhere. And, the world will hold you accountable, or now you're embarrassed not to pursue your goals. So it's a level of accountability. Or, tell your goals to your partner or your spouse or your friends and family so that they can hold you accountable. I just don't think that works long term. It may be a tactic that helps some people. I'm sure it does because I know so many people who do it, right? Um, but at the highest levels, all my friends who are high level entrepreneurs, anybody who I've connected with that's a high level performer, they just don't do that. It's just not a thing for them because they are serious about their goals regardless of whether or not somebody's supporting them, whether or not somebody's holding them accountable, somebody else externally is giving them a push or pulling them forward. They know their goals, they're serious about their goals, they're planning on pursuing their goals. It's They're self-driven, they're self-starters, they're self-accountable. And I think that is the recipe. So, I've just never been interested in band-aid solutions,
Right.
something that maybe works in the short term, maybe gets you excited, maybe motivates you, maybe hypes you up. Go on Instagram and tell the world, guys, I'm going to make $1 million this month. Hold me to it. Okay, maybe that inspires you. Maybe that helps you get up tomorrow. Does that help you get up the next day and the next day and the next day? Does that help you take the right actions forward? Does that help you in a month from now, in 2 years from now? What is the long term strategy here? So I think, me personally, I've just never had an interest in that. That's why you'll never see me publish my goals, quote unquote, or post, oh, hey guys, I'm up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. It's just, I'm not interested in anybody else's opinion. I'm not interested in publicizing my goals and my direction. I'm not interested in external accountability. I have enough self accountability, personal accountability to take me through 10 lifetimes. I really don't need any more. So those are my thoughts on that. I know I'm rambling a bit here, so I'm going to turn it over to you, but I just wanted to say that because I don't think I've ever really spoken on this topic. So I'm really happy you brought this up. I have very strong feelings about this. And maybe this is just what works for me. I'm very open to the idea that this might not work for others. I understand I'm a very driven individual just by nature, and forces of nurture and my upbringing and challenges and all that have made the person I am today. But what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah. So I completely agree as far as the discipline side. Now I take a little bit of a different approach as far as to the time schedule. So I'm definitely not a 4 a.m. person. There's no way in hell that you're catching me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I will stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning working.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll wake up later, but I'll work later too. And for me, the benefit that I see out of that is I get my operations done first, right? And then I have an unlimited time period that I can be creative. So I can take everything that I learned and experienced throughout the day and build upon that at the end of the night through the extra hours that I have. So I'm more of a night owl than I am an early riser.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I love that, and I'm not a believer in what works. I believe in what works for you.
Right.
And by the way, I'm naturally a night owl as well, but I get a really big psychological win when I'm up early and getting things done early. So for me, I've realized over time, over the years, I've tried every freaking routine there is. I've tried everything there is, and I know what works for me, and I just stick to that. But I'm fully aware that a lot of entrepreneurs are night owls. A lot of the highest performers have never woken up at 4 or 5 a.m. in their lives. I know this one guy particularly that I met him at a couple of events. He's a 9-figure entrepreneur, so doing over 100 million in revenue per year. Very successful
Mhm.
guy, very known in the public space as well. And he used to always joke. He used to say, the only time I'd be up at 5 a.m. is if I'm going to the airport. And I can promise you, I'm miserable and I hate my life at that point. He was like very, adamant on that. So
Yeah.
that's totally fine. It's not about what works, about what works for you. So 100%. I'm glad you brought that up. But what I was asking you, and the point I want you to speak on, is accountability. Because
Yeah.
again, I believe in self accountability. And I think external accountability, you're putting your goals out there so that you're under more pressure. I think it's just BS. I think it's empty gestures. I think if you're not a self driven person, if you're not holding yourself accountable to your goals, then it's not important to you. What you're signaling to yourself is this isn't serious enough that you're going to follow through. So I think the real solution to long term success is being somebody who's self accountable. So, what are your thoughts on that aspect of it?
Yeah. Like I said, I completely agree. Um, you know, for me personally, I don't care what other people think. So rely on other people for accountability is just not feasible. My wife and I, you know, we have a great understanding and a great relationship, but trust and believe we disagree all the time. For me, I know what I have to do and I know what my goals are, and I know that I'm not going to achieve them by allowing anybody else's expectations to hold weight over those goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you would agree as well. I just wanted to clarify that. I wanted you to speak on it from your perspective. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that is a bit off the business topic, but I think is
Mhm.
very relevant. I know we have a lot of young guys, young ladies listening to this. What are some of the, I guess, factors that creates a healthy relationship or that you would look for in a partner, like your wife, for example, who's on the same page, who's supporting your goals, who's helping, I guess you're both helping propel each other towards a better future together. What are some of those requirements that you would look for that you think are important for entrepreneurs to have in their spouses?
Okay. First and foremost, it's absolutely brutal and honest communication. You can't be concerned about feelings when you're engaged in a serious relationship like that, because feelings don't come into play. That won't handle your finances, that won't take care of your needs, that won't handle anything. So you have to put your emotions out of it, even though, yes, this is somebody that you love and care for and want to support. You can still have that emotional context to it, but your communications have to be void of emotion, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So taking emotions out of the communications and being able to have real conversations with each other.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you can't do that, you can't have an understanding. If they don't understand what it is that you're working on, especially if you want to go into business, because honestly, it's more demanding than anything out there. You can be a Fortune 100 CEO, and that doesn't hold the weight of a bootstrapped operation or a small business owner, because you have an entire team, well established enterprise resources to support you. So you're really not too stressed out at that point.
Hmm.
I would argue that really starting your own business is the highest level of responsibility, because then, especially if you have employees, it's not just you that you have a stake in the game for. Now you're responsible for making sure your employees' families are fed.
Yeah. I would say, short of being a parent, starting a business is the highest level of responsibility.
I would argue that it's higher.
Wow.
I'm a father of five. I have five children. I love and support, and I want the best for them in life, right? But I have at this time over 6,000 people that I'm trying to make sure can support their families at the same time.
Hmm. From that perspective, yeah, I definitely see it. I'm not a father yet, so I can't really comment on that. I'm just going to take your word for it. If you're a father of five, and I know how much you care about your children as well and the family and whatnot, and you're saying that being in business is a higher degree of responsibility, then yeah, I'll take your word for it. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I wanted to ask you about networking and some of the things that you've learned from all the networking calls that you've done, because I know this was a priority for you for years and years, for a couple of years at least now. So you've been on a ton of calls, networking with people, entrepreneurs, business owners. Generally speaking, I have no real intention with this question. I'm just wondering, curious. Generally speaking, what are some things you've learned from all these networking calls and all these conversations you've had with these entrepreneurs?
Ooh. Um, that's a very broad-based question, brother. We could be on that topic for days.
Yeah,
Um, I'm going to try and keep it to the networking here, and not be so specific, if that makes sense.
sure.
Um, for me, networking, again, is kind of that key, and we addressed it a little bit before, that in my honest opinion, 95% of people network entirely wrong. Because when you go to all these network groups, they're there like, okay, this is what I do in my business. This is, what I'm doing right now. Like, okay, great. Are you going to be in that business 3 years from now, 7 years now, 20 years from now? I don't give a damn, honestly. So, what are you passionate about? What are your causes? What are your goals? That's what I want to know. What is it that you most need to achieve what you really want to do? Because I could care less if you're working for Goldman Sachs right now, because that's not your in state goal. Nobody likes working in that space, except maybe Goldman and Sachs.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, it's really trying to get into the mindset of the individuals you're speaking with and maintaining an open mind. And then as you do that, especially as you get to the point that you do it as much as I do, you're able to not just connect pieces to your own puzzle, but you're able to connect other people's puzzles. And when you can do that, that provides you more value than anything else to those people. And then, we've talked about the nature of reciprocity in human psychology. That's probably the most powerful tool to building a business.
So why don't you expand more on that? Because I know we've talked about that. We both understand exactly what you mean, but
Mhm.
talk about the power of reciprocation and why that's so important in sales and business and just with human nature. For anybody who doesn't know, maybe explain what reciprocation or that whole principle even is, and then why it's so important.
Okay, so the power of reciprocity, right? And this is not to say go in with this immediate, intent of, well, I want something out of you. So you have to be able to give something to others that doesn't take away from you and that you have absolutely no expectation of any return from. And you do this over and over and over. And just through the nature of reciprocity, what happens is you build this kind of debt factor in their mind, even though it's not a conscious thought, it's still occurring in the subconscious because this individual has provided something that benefited my life and they didn't take anything away from me to do it. So now they feel like they owe you. So as that relationship continues, that value will be returned in one way, shape, or form. Can't say it's necessarily the way that you're going to expect, but it can be new business opportunities. It can be a new partnership. It can be a random gift. It can be absolutely anything. Um, but it does come back to you in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think it's a huge principle. There's a book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or Thinking Slow, Thinking Fast. I'm not sure exactly how it goes, but I actually saw the author speak at a live event not too long ago, sometime in the last year. And he was talking about some of these principles in his book. But it's all about cognitive biases, heuristics, and some of these things that as human beings we're just naturally susceptible to.
Right.
And like you said, and I love that you prefaced it like this, it's not to exploit these things. We don't learn all these things so that we can then manipulate other human beings or exploit them.
Right.
It's just really to understand human nature. It's to understand how we communicate. I've said this a billion times, and I'll continue to say it a billion more. Being in sales and being great at sales or being a great entrepreneur is about being a high level communicator, right? An effective high level communicator. That's what it comes down to. And there are so many minutiae and details and tactical steps that go into communication. And heuristics and cognitive biases and understanding human psychology is really just one of those factors. And reciprocation is a huge one. And there have been studies done. I think in that book he talks about reciprocation as well. There are other books on it, but you can look up different studies that have been done, psychological studies that have shown, I believe if I have the numbers correctly, when you give somebody something, they tend to reciprocate 2 to 3 times more than what they received. So it
Right.
becomes an obligation for them to reciprocate, but not just reciprocate equally. That was the interesting part.
Yeah.
And they highlighted this factor of the study. When they want to reciprocate, they don't just reciprocate equal amount to what they received. They tend to want to give 2 to 3 times more. So just think about how important that is in entrepreneurship and business and sales. And I think this really ties back into long-term relationships over short-term transactions, because if you go in with that mindset, they're going to reciprocate 2 to 3 times more and you're going to have clients for life. And I
Right.
think it goes a long way. So I think that was an interesting factor, the fact that they reciprocate far more than what you actually give them.
Yeah. And then, that kind of goes along with a scientific mindset. I'm a very curious individual, so I like the fields of chaos theory and, the concept of the butterfly effect.
Mhm.
Right. So a butterfly can bat its wings and it creates a ripple that creates, a tsunami on the other side of the world. Even though it's not really a plausible situation, when you look at technology and how connected people really are these days, you're only ever 6 degrees of separation away from any other single person in the world. So if you can make a small ripple in somebody's life, right, you could be reaching out and touching that person that you need to get contact with. So we'll talk about some of the most successful people in the world: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett. All of those individuals have their own networks, and those networks have networks, and those networks have networks. So a small ripple that you send out that you're not expecting anything back can come back to give you what you need somewhere else without you even realizing it.
100% agree with the butterfly effect and how one tiny action, one tiny step, one tiny thing can lead to another and lead to another, and then create this huge impact in the long run. And in terms of finding out you're only one or two or five or six connections away from very big players, I've learned that lesson over and over and over and over again, where I've had friends of mine, connections of mine connect me with some pretty big players. And then I've realized, oh, wow, I was one ask or one conversation or one introduction away from some fairly large players in their own rights. And I learned that actually more recently again, that I'm pretty much two connections away from a pretty well known guy that I would love to get connected to. So it's always interesting to have that reminder. So I love that you brought that up. Now, I'm very familiar with all of this, but I'm not sure I'm familiar with chaos theory. So what is that? And you mind explaining that for me?
Uh, I think that would go outside of the restrictions of the timeline for this podcast, but chaos theory essentially states, right, you can do everything with the maximum amount of controls in a situation, right? Control every aspect of their circumstance or whatever it is. Um, and even with all of those controls in place, the most unexpected thing will happen. Um, and that's kind of a way that I take building my business, even though it doesn't sound like it has an order, it really does. Um, so what I'm doing, while it may not make sense to a lot of people, right? Uh,
Mhm.
I'm looking for those ripples to come back that will get me past my next step, if that makes sense.
Is this similar to obviously a different outcome, but similar ideology to the saying of the most entertaining outcome is always the most likely outcome? Like one of those type of belief systems, except in this case, it's not entertainment. It's the most chaotic outcome is the most likely outcome. Is that essentially the point?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know how I've never come across that. Where is this theory originally from?
It's actually a well-established theory within science. It has its own separate division, just like string theory or anything else.
Really? And it's
Yeah,
known as chaos theory.
yep.
Okay,
And it actually got popularized in Jurassic Park, the original one.
really?
Yeah, as far as mainstream media, the well-established scientific segment well before them, but that's when the general public kind of became aware, really, of at least to a degree what chaos theory was.
How so did it get established in Jurassic Park? Did they address it by
So,
name?
for example, in Jurassic Park, so the controls they put in place to control the dinosaurs, right, was that they genetically modified all of the animals so they would all be female, so they couldn't breed and reproduce, right? So that was their control in assuring that that didn't happen. But they had inadvertently admitted a gene cell from a frog that was actually able to shift genders when one gender lapsed. So that gene mutation carried through to the dinosaurs, and then they were then able to breed and create the chaos of what Jurassic Park is famous for, which couldn't be limited or stopped by humans.
Right. Well, first of all, this just reminds me I have to go back and watch Jurassic Park again because I'm forgetting a lot of the details here. But that's interesting. So, I mean, wouldn't this thought process or this ideology make the world a pretty scary place if you believe the most chaotic outcome is always going to be the outcome that comes to fruition?
Well, it's not that it always comes to fruition, but it's that you never have ultimate control. So you have to always be
Mm,
prepared for
okay.
the most unlikely circumstance.
Got it. So that's a bit of a different take than that. I
Mhm,
definitely agree with. I'm always leaving a bit of room for chaos
mhm.
or for uncontrollable factors or for unforeseen circumstances. In my business, in my planning, in finances, in my personal life, in every direction. I'm always leaving a bit of room because everything you do realistically is risk. I mean, I usually try to clarify this in business context. Risk is permanent loss. Everything else is
Mhm.
just volatility. But when it comes to life and just speaking about life in general, I mean, everything's crazy. Everything's risky. We're on a rock spinning at ridiculous speeds in the middle of the universe always expanding, and we only know the observable universe, which is already crazy enough that we can't even wrap our minds around it, let alone outside of our observation. So everything's crazy, everything's chaotic. So I always leave a bit of room for that. So I think that's an important mindset to actually have in business as an entrepreneur, because we saw over the last few years, right, the craziness that happened. A lot of people went out of business, the unforeseen circumstances, all these challenges, and nowadays it's not like the world is um, any less any more stress free. I guess,
Mhm.
it's not like there's less happening. There's always more things happening. So I think that's a pretty important factor, to actually leave some room for chaos, and understand you're not going to control everything, but you focus on what you can control.
Yeah. So to give you an example, I heard a story recently about a true circumstance that happened out of Texas. And for me, it kind of symbolizes what chaos theory can be. Because you have the negative outcomes that are chaotic, but you have the positive outcomes that are chaotic as well. So, individual, kind of middle class, average dude is driving down the street in Texas, and there's another gentleman that's broke down on the side of the road. This gentleman stops in traffic, gets out of his vehicle, helps the gentleman push his car off the road, and then drives on with his day. Little did that individual know, nor did he care, because he wasn't worried about anything coming back to him, right? That the individual that he helped happened to be a billionaire. So that gentleman had taken his plates, done his research, found out that the gentleman had a home that he was paying off at about $180,000 mortgage. So before he even made it home at the end of his workday, his mortgage had been paid off by the gentleman that he helped.
Wow. This is a true story?
Yeah, it's a true story.
Wow, I wonder who that billionaire is.
I don't know. They never said. I'm
Oh,
sure it's a matter
interesting.
of anonymity, but
I mean,
chaos doesn't
Texas
have to be
billionaire,
bad.
I'm pretty sure Elon moved out there. Unless
Yeah.
it's, some oil tycoons or whatnot. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's really interesting. I honestly thought that story was going a different direction, because you said Texas pulled
Mhm.
over to help somebody. I was like, this is not going to end right. But yeah, that tells me about my own biases. So
Mhm.
that's awesome. Yeah, this is a classic story of, always help somebody in need and give. And
Mhm.
you never know what you're going to get in return. So I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. But this is an interesting concept, this chaos theory. So I'm going to look this up. I'm
Mhm.
surprised I haven't come across this. I've read a lot of different topics, a lot of different books. I'm always trying to educate myself. So the fact that I haven't come across this is interesting. Any other interesting theories, or maybe philosophies that you operate your life or your business by?
Uh, I think that's the primary one. At least for me, that's kind of the epiphany that I had, and that's what I've stuck to. So if I develop something new, I'll let you know.
Yeah,
That's
I'd love
that's
to
kind of
hear it.
where I am right now.
Sounds good. We'll do another podcast on the next theory once you develop it.
Yeah.
But final question before I move on from this, because I don't think I asked you this, and I just want to know out of my own curiosity, how do you apply that? So knowing chaos theory and subscribing to that theory, and understanding it on a deeper level, how do you apply that to your business, to your day to day life?
Yeah. So for me, it really comes down to kind of your universal law, and you know what you put out is what you get back, but it comes back threefold. So I choose to put good things out there. I choose to do good for others without any expectation of return, because by doing that, right, you allow all of these other doors to open that bring you different opportunities and different positivity. Now, the same is true if you're putting negativity out in such a manner, right? Then, of course, the inverse is true. All kinds of other doors are open that can bring circumstances into your life that can make it worse. So every both personal and professional interaction, I try to put something positive into it.
So you brought up the universe, and essentially the idea of, I guess you could say, karma, except that maybe karma usually refers to, reincarnation and whatnot, but in this case it's karma in this life. And I believe in always doing right, always, doing positive things, always doing more than you're asked of. And it does come back to you. I'm a believer in that as well. At the very least, you surround yourself with positivity, and you know that you're having a positive impact on the world, on your community, on those around you. So I think regardless, it's important. But where this really, the line gets blurred for me, and it almost rubs me the wrong way when it comes to entrepreneurship and business, is when people talk about the law of attraction, and manifesting their goals and dreams, and I'm going to sit on my couch and manifest my reality, and I'm manifesting $1 million business idea, and all this stuff to me just sounds like gibberish, because you can have the law of attraction, all that, as a supplementary philosophy, but really what matters is the law of action, doing the work, executing. taking one step further today towards your goals. And everything I've ever achieved in my life, and I didn't come from money, I didn't come from, anything being passed down to me. I had to learn every single skill I've learned from scratch. I was very much, again, a self-starter, pursuing books, mentors, things of that nature since I was 15, 16. So everything I've earned has been the hard way. Everything
Right.
I've earned has been through taking action. I never once sat there and said, I'm going to manifest anything. Now, as I get older, I definitely become more and more spiritual in a way you could say, and I'm open to any possibility. Like you said, chaos theory. I'm open to the universe being an intelligent thing and giving you what you ask for, or whatever else it might be. So sure, I'll keep a positive mindset, keep an open mindset. I'll take every advantage that I can get, but I'm gonna rely on my work ethic and the actions to get the results that I want. So where do you draw that line between universe and all these great ideas versus more real tangible ideas like doing the work?
Yeah. Um, so for me, there's not as much of a distinction. So I do use manifestation. Both me and my wife are strong believers in manifesting what we want, but
Perfect. So this is a great
manifesting,
conversation then,
yeah,
because we got both sides of this.
manifestation. There's a lot of confusion about what a manifestation is, right? So manifesting isn't putting a wish out, right? So I wish to be rich and successful and famous and attractive, right? Manifestation is really just sowing a seed. And it can be, a metaphysical seed as in a thought or an intent or a passion. Now, it may not start out all that big, but you're manifesting this, right? So you're sowing this mental seed into your mind. So when you say, I want to be a business owner, okay, so you're manifesting. Now, you have to nurture that seed. And that's where you're getting at, and that's the work that you have to put in. If you don't nurture it, if you're manifesting and you never provide the nurturing that that seed needs, it's never going to manifest.
So essentially you're saying manifesting something is putting a claim to it or
Right.
putting it out there that you want to do this thing.
Well, I mean, it's not just the claim, right? It's actually, outside of just speaking of that once, you're sowing it into your conscious thought. So this is something that I'm actively thinking about now. So now you're starting to put in that work. So when you manifest it, you're speaking it into existence, and you're speaking your to your consciousness so that you can focus on that manifestation. So what do you need to do for that seed to sprout? So what are the first steps, right? And then it kind of grows from there, and then it grows into those 8-hour days, 16-hour days, 20-hour days. So it's a long process. So manifestation doesn't stop at the manifestation. It's continued throughout the journey while you're putting in the work to nurture that manifestation.
So let me ask you a genuine question then. This isn't coming from a malicious place. I'm just genuinely curious. What's the difference between that and the way that I would approach it more pragmatically, which is be very clear on who you want to become,
Mhm.
what goals you want to achieve, get super clear on that, and then do the work.
There is
Isn't that the
none.
same thing as you saying, manifest who you want to become, manifest your goals or your reality, and then do the work?
Yeah, there is none because all the same steps are required. So it's just a synonym.
Got it. Okay. Well, in that case, that makes a lot more sense to me. But I've seen this concept used and abused in a lot of different ways, and that's why I'm telling you. I've come across too many business owners, salespeople, entrepreneurs, or even people in my personal life who talk about manifesting, and I know for a fact they're not taking the actions. They're not doing the work. They're not
Well,
consistent. They're not
uh,
disciplined.
I'll give you an example because there's a lot of fanatical nonsense out there, right? A lot of people manifest that they're going to win the lottery, right? But then never buy lottery tickets, and they're not
Hmm.
consistent with it. So those
Hmm.
individuals that are inconsistent with buying those lottery tickets never win the lottery, do they?
Hmm.
It's only
No, of
these
course.
individuals, typically what you see for those individuals that are winning the lottery, they're the individuals that habitually do this on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis, whatever, for days, weeks, months, years. So they're putting in that work to manifest that goal, right?
Hmm.
So it's the same thing in anything. Manifestation without effort is nonsense.
Got it. So I'm glad we agree on that. I think we both agree that it's the effort, it's the work, it's the actions that take you a step closer to your goals that actually generates the results.
Yeah,
I
and
think
it's
it's the definition.
consistency in those actions despite failure, because you'll
Yeah,
fail a million times before you win.
absolutely. So what I'm understanding then is the manifestation is really a bit of self confidence. Essentially, it is to boost your own self esteem.
Yeah, to a degree.
Because otherwise, what would be the difference, right? Because if I'm somebody who doesn't manifest, and let's say I have full belief in myself, and I continue to try at things, fail, keep getting back up, keep trying until I eventually get there, but I don't call it manifestation, or I don't, subscribe to the ideology. I just, set clear targets and get after it and fail, try again, fail, try again,
Yeah.
versus somebody who's manifesting, quote unquote, and then doing the work. What's the difference?
There is none. It's the exact same thing. So
Correct.
it doesn't matter what you call it. It's
Okay.
really just that recipe for growth and achieving something. There's a lot of I don't like discussing religion because I'm not a particularly religious individual.
Sure.
But there's a lot of false sheep, wolves in sheep's clothing, that talk about something but really aren't practicing it and really aren't doing it, so to speak.
Hmm.
They're just speaking it.
Hmm.
And the same is true for manifestation, and whether you call it manifestation or whether you call it entrepreneurial discipline or whatever the case is, it's the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I get where you're going with that concept as well. I mean, if you look at the spiritual world, quote
Mhm.
unquote, there are a lot of healers, coaches, whatever it might be, who are not healthy, happy, or fulfilled or wealthy, but they're giving advice on, again, manifesting that reality and doing X, Y, Z, which is why it's put a really bad taste in my mouth because I've seen so many terrible examples of it. In your definition of manifestation, we definitely agree. It sounds like we're exactly on the same page.
Right.
So I don't know if that's really what manifestation is or that's your take on it because
Mhm.
you're already an entrepreneur and a practical person. So you take it the right way and apply it the right way. But from what I've seen and what I've heard when it comes to the law of attraction and the secret and manifestation, everything else, it's honestly a lot of nonsense. It's just been a lot of that's all I can call it. It's just spiritual teachings basically without any
Mhm.
substance, and it's it doesn't take into account. Here's, I guess, a big problem with it. It doesn't take into account what we know as survivorship bias, right?
Mhm.
So you see, uh, I don't know, who should we talk about? A high level entrepreneur saying, yes, I am where I am today because I manifested this reality. I pictured this exact car that I'm going to drive, this exact model, whatever else. Okay, that's great. But that doesn't consider everything else that made that person who they are and why they are where they are today, right? And it doesn't consider the millions, millions of other people who
Mhm.
also pictured that same car, same model, wanted that same life, but never got there. The millions of people who are still broke, the millions of people who are unfulfilled, whatever else, right? So that's what we call survivorship bias. We only look at the survivors and we paint this glorious picture. We're neglecting the millions of people who had this, tried the same tactics, tried to manifest a better future, but didn't make it, right? I mean, a funny example of this that I heard, I think it was Dave Chappelle, the comedian. I think it was him. I'm not sure, but I think it was him that said, try telling a child in Africa who's starving, manifest your food. You think food's just going to show up in front of them and they're going to feed themselves? Like, oh, that's what I mean, right? It's
Right.
it's this fake belief system of I'm just going to think something or believe it and say it, and it becomes borderline delusional. Believe me, I've seen a lot of examples of this. That's why I'm so strong about this. I've
Mhm.
seen people become completely delusional about the reality of things because they don't want to break the frame of manifestation.
Yeah.
So they neglect all the real things that they need to address in their business and their lives, and keep this fake positivity. And that fake positivity doesn't go anywhere. That's not what gets results. I've never seen it work. Right.
Right.
So I make it my mission to get that message across, and whoever it helps, it helps. Whoever it doesn't, it doesn't. And if it pisses some people off who are really into this ideology, then great. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Uh, but I try to approach it, with an open mind. But those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Uh, for me, those individuals that don't piece the two together, they're already having their needs fulfilled. So it's more of a theoretical or a psychological fulfillment that they're getting rather than a true manifestation or I guess, a tangible manifestation, if that makes sense.
That's a really good point. They're really just psychologically getting that little dopamine hit,
Hmm.
fulfilling themselves in fiction because the reality isn't there,
Yeah.
and they're sticking to that belief system. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's exactly what's happening. So this conversation turned out a lot more interesting than I even anticipated. So I think we'll have to have you back on for part two, part three, talk about different theories, different aspects of business. I think you would agree the psychology of entrepreneurs is really the most interesting part
Right.
because the psychology determines everything else, right? Yeah. So as we start to wrap this up, we always wrap with a question that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. Having the background that you have, being in the military, being in the corporate world, working at the high stages of government, which we didn't even talk about, you didn't even address. I like that you played really humble, but you also worked at the high stages of the U.S. government. The business and entrepreneurship experience that you have, being a father of five, I think you bring a really interesting perspective to this. So I'd be curious to hear your answer. Knowing everything you know today, if you could go back to your younger self and give yourself just one piece of advice, what would that be?
Ooh. Um, just one piece of advice. Honestly, can't say how I would phrase it, but that piece of advice would have to sow that seed to make me passionate about researching what I researched that developed my understanding of how success grows through relationships and value.
Got it. So it would come back to telling your younger self about the value of relationships.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard to tell anybody that, right? Like, you can't
Mhm.
tell it. A lot of the gurus touch on bits and pieces of it every single time they get up on the stage, but they never kind of paint the whole picture for you, because it's hard to put in words. Until you understand it, you can't understand it. it, if that makes any sense. I sound like gibberish, but yeah.
No, that's I love that you said that because I know exactly what you mean. Some
Mhm.
lessons just have to be learned the hard way or understood in real context. In theory, you can't really contextualize. You can't make sense of it until you
Right.
really get it. So you would basically try to point yourself, your younger self, in that direction earlier to understand the real value of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I love that. Awesome. I probably should have guessed that since we talked about that so much, and I know that's such a high priority for you. I should have guessed that was your advice. Tim, you brought a ton of value today. Really appreciate your time. If anybody wants to get in contact with you, tune into your work, maybe ask you about some of these theories we discussed today, where can they find you?
I'm on literally every social media under either Timothy Franklin or FWM Designers LLC.
Got it. Awesome. And again, I appreciate your time. I think we had a lot of great conversations that sets the stage for more conversations to come. So I'm looking forward to having you back here in the future. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Sounds good, brother. And I enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, Tim.